let's finish building our control rig for the pod racer. So we have our control object in place. Now we need to align it to the object that we'll control, because this would be kind of confusing for the animator. Okay, so to do that, Max has actually some really great tools to align an object to another. So for our case, we could actually use what is called Quick Snap or Quick Align. With our control object selected, let's go ahead and press Shift A, and then go ahead and choose our cab's window. And notice it's going to align that object to the pivot of the window. And then we can kind of move that back into place to center the pivot up. Okay, great. Now that that's done, I'd like to show you where you can also access that tool under Tools, Align. We'll go to the drop down, and notice here is the Align tool and the Quick Align. The difference between the two, the Align tool will actually allow us to match not only our position, which we've just done, but also rotation and scale. Whereas Quick Align is just for matching an object's position to another. Okay, we'll actually be using Align a little bit later on. Okay, so now that that's in place, we can go ahead and kind of color code this object to add clarity. All right, I like to color code control objects, especially when it comes to dealing with left and right halves of an object that is being rigged. Again, for clarity, so for our right side we can use green, our left side we can use blue, and you'll find that to be a common practice when building controls. So for the center object, I'd like to use a yellow, so we can go to our object color dialog and then go ahead and choose a yellow. Go ahead and choose this dull yellow. Go ahead and choose OK, and notice now the object's color has changed. Let me show you something else you could do, which I find to be a really neat feature. Selecting our object, going to the top of the Modify panel, we can go ahead and open up the rendering rollout, and notice this, we have the ability to actually render this curve, either showing up in our render view or just rendering in the viewport. And that's what I'm going to go ahead and choose, because we don't want this showing up in our render at all. Alright, being that this is just a control object. Alright, so notice now this adds thickness to our control, just to add a different or unique design to our control object. And then from there we have settings to adjust, let's say, our thickness. So we could always bring this down to, let's say, 0.5, so it's not as thick. Great. Now what I also like to do is go ahead and again have this object conform to our cab, so we can go ahead and just scale it out in the y-axis. There we go. Alright, so from here, our next step is actually going to be to go ahead and clean this object up. Meaning we want to go ahead and reset what is called the X-form, basically the transform data of this object. The reason why we want to do that is so that we don't run into any scaling issues or skewing issues with our object when we animate it. Alright, so this is very important that we do this for all of our controls. And to do this, we need to head over to our Utilities tab, and then from there we want to go ahead and go to Reset X-form and choose Reset Selected. You'll see the a slight change in our pod shape. Okay, but all this says is that we have now reset the X-form data of this object. So what that means is that the scale of this object is back to 100% or 111. Whereas before those numbers were definitely off. Alright, so that's basically what that's going to do. Now if we were to head over to our Modify panel, notice we have this X-form modifier, which is applied once we reset our X-form. So the next step to get rid of this is actually going to go ahead and collapse our stack. But we want to do it in a way where we still keep this a curve. Alright, and not change this to an object. So again, it will not show up in our render. So to do that, we need to head over back to our Utilities tab. You can go ahead and close out the Reset X-form and now choose Collapse. And notice under Collapse, under our output type, we have two different options. We can go ahead and convert this to a mesh, or just simply edit our modifier stack. Alright, this is what we want to choose to preserve this object's makeup. Alright, so once we choose this top option, modifier stack result, and choose collapse selected. Now notice this, heading back over to our modify panel, everything is clean. Alright, great. Alright, so we have our first control set up. Now what we want to go ahead and do is basically link this to what will be our global control, which is our group. Alright, so that as this group is connected to our motion path, this object will follow correctly. So to do that, we simply go ahead and choose the link, select the link tool. Alright, this is how we parent one object to another. So let me show you what this means. If we were to actually deselect this tool or actually come out of the tool by pressing the Q key, which is for selection, if we were to go ahead and just select our group and start to move this around, notice that control object is going to stay behind. What this means is that when we later on link our cab body to this control, the cab body will also stay. Alright, we want that cab to follow with the group. So to do this, simply go ahead and go to our link tool and link our control to the group. Okay, now also notice the size of the group bracket slightly changes because of the addition to that group now. The addition to that group's hierarchy. Alright, now notice this. Let's go ahead and select our cab, its group, and let's go ahead and now link it to our control object. Now, notice this. Selecting our group, going to our move tool, pressing the W key, we can now go ahead and move this around and notice our cab will follow. It's exactly what we want. Okay, so from here, what we want to go ahead and do now is preserve this object's position, meaning that if we ever need to go back to its original position, we want to do so at the click of a button, so to speak. To do that, what we need to do is freeze the transforms of our control object. So with the control object selected, we'll just go ahead and Alt right click and choose Freeze Transform. So what this is basically going to do, if we were to go ahead and choose Yes now, it's actually going to consider this location of our control the 0 location. So let's say if we created another object and placed it here and zeroed or freeze the transformations, this would be the 0 location for that object. Alright, so watch this. Now that we've frozen the transformations on our control, if we were to go ahead and move this object and then go ahead and Alt right click, this is our animation quad menu. If we were to Alt right click now and choose transform to 0, notice that's going to pop that object right back to its new 0 position, which is great. Alright, so again, the steps, you want to go ahead and reset your X form, then go ahead and link to your control object or your global control, and then you want to go ahead and Alt right click and choose Freeze Transform, and now you'll be able to comfortably set this object back to its 0 position by using Transform to 0, again from the Alt right click menu or the animation quad menu. Alright, so now that that's in place, what we want to go ahead and do next is basically work on setting up the other objects. Alright, so we have the engines to work on, we have the cables. Well, actually they're going to be set up somewhat different. What we really need to focus on now is setting up controls for these engines. So let's go ahead and take care of that, and it's going to be the same process. Alright, so I'm going to go back to the Create menu, and I'm going to go ahead and choose a rectangle shape. Let's go ahead and choose something different so we can have it conform to our engine. And we can start with the left side. Alright, from here I'm just going to go ahead and kind of draw out this shape. Right click so we can exit the rectangle tool. And now we can go ahead and press Shift A and align it to the engine body. So it's going to be centered, at least in our X and Z axis. And then from there we can go ahead and move it up in the Y axis to fix the centering of it. Okay, and what we can do from here, heading over to our Modify panel, is right click and choose Convert to Editable Spline. And watch what this is going to do. We now have access to go ahead and open up this editable spline to get to its vertex sub-object. Go ahead and select these points and start to pull them out to conform the shape a little bit better. Alright, so for these back points, let's say we have them taper somewhat. Now if we were to select these points and go to our scale tool, notice we cannot taper them just yet because we need to change the pivot of our selection. So we can do that at our toolbar. Okay, right now it's set to use pivot point center. I'm going to go ahead and switch this to use the object center or selection center. So now we can go ahead and scale this to kind of taper that in. And something very important here is we want to go ahead and make sure that we switch this back to the original setting of using pivot point center. This is very important for animation. Alright, just so that we're pivoting at the right spot. Alright, so now we can go ahead and exit that vertex of object by choosing the editable spline. Notice as we go ahead and click that, we toggle back and forth. Alright, but once that's done, what I'm going to go ahead and do is go ahead and go to the rotate tool, and I'm going to go ahead and hold down shift, and then go ahead and just clone this object. And again, we want to make sure we have vertex, or excuse me, angle snap turned on, pressing the A key. And it should already be on. But I'm going to go ahead and hold down shift and now rotate this object -90 degrees. And now we have a cloned object. We'll go ahead and choose OK. And now we can go to attach and attach this curve to the other curve so they're just one shape. Great. Okay, so now that we have this shape in place, I'm going to go ahead and rename this. This is our CC control curve underscore L, being that it's on the left side, underscore engine 01. And we get into naming conventions and the importance of naming conventions, not only in this course, but also in our introduction to rigging, introduction to character rigging, and character rigging for production courses. So if you're interested, I recommend you checking those out. Alright, so now that that's attached, I'm going to go ahead and right click to come out of the attach tool. Okay, so the next step here is going to be to go ahead and color code this. This is on the left side, so I like to use for the left side a color of blue. Okay, great. So now that that's done, we want to go ahead and reset the X form on this object. I'll head over to the utilities, go ahead and choose reset X form, reset selected. And now we want to go ahead and go back to collapse and choose collapse selected with that first option chosen, which should under the output type, which should already be set. But now that this object has been cleaned up, we can go ahead and link it to our global control, our main pod racer group. And now we can go ahead and link our cab body to that control, and then go ahead and select the control, go ahead and right or alt right click and choose freeze transform. Okay, great. So now that that's in place, let's say we go ahead and take this object and mirror it over to the right side. And I'll show you a trick on how to mirror things in Max. So to do that, we can go ahead and use our mirror tool. I'll just go to the toolbar, I'll middle click on an empty space and go ahead and drag this over. Drag this toolbar over. So notice how I can scroll. Here's the mirror tool. Alright, but notice we can go ahead and choose no clone if we just want to go ahead and mirror the object without actually cloning it, or we can go ahead and make a copy. Alright, and this is what we want to do. We want to create a copy. And right now, we'll go ahead and cancel that. We want to make sure that we have the right object selected. Okay, there we go. So I'll just go back to mirror copy. And now we can go ahead and use this offset to kind of slide it over, but I don't like to use that necessarily. I'll go ahead and choose OK and show you a better method. Alright, so I'll go ahead and take this clone, move it over. What we need to do is go ahead and select our engine control, head over to our move tool, and notice we have its X position in world space. So watch this. If we want to go ahead and take this object and mirror it over, we simply need to put in the reciprocal on this cloned object. So we can always go ahead and copy this value of -50.268. I'm going to copy that. I'll select the next object, paste that value in and get rid of the negative sign, and notice now this object has been mirrored over. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and recolor this. Since it's on the right side, we can use green. Okay, next step is going to be to go ahead and rename this. So instead of L, that's going to be R. Instead of engine 002, that's going to be 01. The 01 basically represents how unique this object is in the scene. So after cloning this object, you saw that we had a 02 at the end. Alright, meaning that this object's name was not unique. But all we had to do was go ahead and rename it to correct that problem. But this is, again, another way of adding clarity to our scene. Okay, so now that that's done, again, our next step is going to be to go ahead and link this. The transformations have already been frozen on this object, so we don't have to, or excuse me, the XForm has already been reset, so we don't have to worry about that step with this control. What we do need to do is go ahead and link it to our main global group, and then go ahead and alt right click and go ahead and set its transform to 0, or excuse me, freeze its transformations. Okay, great. And I'll go ahead and just double check to make sure the left side has been frozen by going to transform to 0. All right, great. All right, so we have our controls set up. I'm going to go ahead and take this engine group and link it to the control object. There we have it. All right, so we can go ahead and move this around. Great. Go ahead and take the other one. Move that around. Excellent. Oh, it's way off in space. So I need it back to its original position. I'll go ahead and alt right click, transform to 0. Excellent. So we have our objects in place. They have all been renamed. They have all been cleaned up. So now we can move on to the next lesson where we start to kind of organize our scene using layers in Max.